The sliding glass doors of the supermarket opened with a low hum, letting in a soft breeze from the outside. Mr. Harris stepped in slowly, leaning slightly on the cart he had pulled from the row outside. His hair was white, his beard neatly kept, and his walk carried the stiffness of age. Still, his eyes scanned the aisles with purpose. He wasn't here to waste time. He had come for something important. The supermarket was crowded, alive with the chatter of families, the beeping of registers, and the sound of shopping carts rolling on the shiny floor. People rushed about, tossing items into their carts: bread, milk, cereal. But when Mr. Harris reached the health aisle and began carefully stacking packs of adult diapers into his cart, the whispers started. A female voice, sharp and mocking, cut through the air. "Well, look at this, stocking up for nap time, Grandpa." Shoppers nearby chuckled. Heads turned. Mr. Harris didn't flinch. He kept stacking, one pack after another, his movements calm, almost deliberate. But the laughter grew louder. The voice belonged to Officer Miller, a local cop in full navy blue uniform, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. She had been walking the aisle casually, but now she stood with her hands on her hips, her grin wide. "I mean, come on," she continued, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "What does an old man need with this many diapers? Planning a slumber party for the retirement home?" The crowd laughed again, some nervously, some openly amused. The officer's confidence filled the space, making her words feel like law itself. But Mr. Harris didn't speak. He didn't defend himself. He simply adjusted the cart, his face calm but unreadable. In the distance, behind a checkout counter, a young cashier froze mid-scan. She had long blonde hair tied back, her face pale with tension. She watched the scene unfold, her lips pressed tightly together. Her eyes stayed locked on the old man, though no one noticed her yet. "Must be tough, huh?" Officer Miller said, walking closer, her boots clicking against the polished floor. "Guess it's true what they say. First you wear them as a baby, then again when you're old. Circle of life, right?" She burst into laughter again, her voice echoing off the tall shelves stacked with cereal boxes. The customers nearby shook their heads, some embarrassed but too afraid to speak up. Others whispered to each other, their eyes darting between the officer and the man who stood silently before her. Mr. Harris's hands gripped the cart handle tightly, the veins on the back of his hands standing out. His silence wasn't weakness, it was strength, the kind that comes from years of carrying burdens too heavy for words. He turned his cart and began pushing it forward, ignoring the laughter behind him. Every step was slow but steady, the wheels squeaking softly as they rolled toward the front. The officer trailed him for a moment, still amused, tossing out another remark about old age and accidents. But as he passed the bakery section, more people noticed. More eyes turned. And the quiet cashier at the register kept watching, her hands trembling slightly as she scanned items for another customer. There was something in her expression that no one else saw yet, something that suggested the officer's cruel game would not last much longer. And though no one realized it in that moment, the war had already begun. Not a war of guns or fists, but a war of dignity, truth, and respect. A war in which silence itself could become the loudest weapon of all. The supermarket seemed to grow quieter as Mr. Harris pushed his cart down the long aisle. The squeak of the wheels echoed in the wide space, mixing with the faint hum of refrigerators and the buzz of overhead lights. Though no one said it out loud, nearly everyone nearby was watching him now. Their curiosity had been stirred by the officer's cruel laughter. "Can you believe this?" a woman whispered to her friend as they stood near the cereal boxes. "All those diapers. What does he even need them for?" Her friend shrugged, giving a small laugh. Maybe the cop was right. Old age, you know. It happens. The whispers spread, soft but sharp, bouncing from shelf to shelf. Each little remark felt like a dagger being thrown at the old man's back. Yet he walked forward with the same slow, steady steps. His face did not show anger. It showed patience, an expression carved from years of hardship, as if he had already lived through storms far greater than this. Behind him, Officer Miller smirked, clearly pleased with the attention she had drawn. "See?" she said loudly to no one in particular. "Even the shoppers agree. Don't be embarrassed, old man, it's nature. Happens to everyone." Her words floated across the aisle like poison, but not everyone was laughing. At the end of the aisle, near the registers, the young cashier stood frozen in place. She had blonde hair tied neatly behind her head, and her blue eyes carried something heavy. Though she kept scanning groceries for the customer in front of her, her focus was not on the items. Her gaze never left the old man. She clenched her jaw tightly, her hands trembling slightly. To anyone else, she looked like just another cashier doing her job. But inside, her chest burned with unspoken truth. Every cruel word from the officer seemed to cut her directly. Though no one knew why, Mr. Harris finally reached the produce section. He stopped for a moment to rest his hands on the cart handle. The weight of the diapers, the whispers, the officer's laughter, it all pressed down on him like a storm. Yet his silence remained unbroken. A small boy, sitting in his mother's cart nearby, tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, why is that policeman laughing at the old man?" he asked innocently. The mother's face flushed red. She quickly hushed her son and wheeled her cart away, embarrassed to have been noticed. The officer, hearing the boy's question, only laughed louder. "Because sometimes life is funny, kid. People can be funny. You'll understand when you're older." The boy looked confused, but his mother pulled him quickly out of sight. The crowd around the officer seemed divided. Some laughed with her, afraid to oppose the uniform. Others looked away, their faces uneasy. But none dared to step forward. Mr. Harris adjusted his cart and turned toward the checkout lanes. His steps were heavier now, but his back remained straight. As he moved, the cashier's chest tightened. She could feel the moment approaching, like the calm before lightning strikes. Her breath quickened. She knew the truth that would silence every cruel laugh. But not yet, not here in the aisle. The time wasn't right. The officer, still trailing behind, called out once more. "Hey, Grandpa, don't forget the baby wipes. You're gonna need them too." Laughter rippled again through the store. But in that laughter, something shifted. A man stocking shelves nearby put down his box cutter, his jaw set tightly. A woman in the bakery frowned deeply, her hands pausing mid-wrap on a loaf of bread. People were beginning to sense that this wasn't just harmless teasing. This was cruelty, and the young cashier at the front felt her pulse racing faster. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes glistening with restrained fire. She knew the time to speak was drawing near. Mr. Harris finally reached the checkout lanes. His cart was heavy with diapers, the wheels squeaking in protest. The officer followed close behind, her grin wide, her badge gleaming as if it gave her the right to mock. But the store itself seemed to grow heavier, quieter. The whispers continued, but now they carried uncertainty. Some shoppers exchanged uneasy looks, some shook their heads. The atmosphere had shifted from amusement to tension. And in the middle of it all, the cashier stood waiting. Her hands hovered over the register, her heart pounding. She could feel her father's approach. She could feel the moment building, a storm rising inside her chest. When he finally reached her counter, when he finally placed the diapers down, the world would change. The truth would finally break free. Asterisk. The hum of the supermarket lights buzzed above as Mr. Harris moved closer to the front lanes. His cart was stacked high with diapers, the blue and white packages piled like small walls. The wheels squeaked at every turn, the sound echoing faintly through the aisles. But behind him, Officer Miller's voice chased after him like an unwanted shadow. "Slow down, Grandpa," she called out, her tone mocking. "Don't push yourself too hard. You don't want You know, spring a leak before you even get home. A ripple of laughter rose again from the shoppers who dared to react. Some chuckled nervously, afraid to seem rude, while others laughed. Openly, emboldened by the officer's uniform, Mr. Harris did not look back. His steps were measured, his eyes fixed ahead. His silence was his armor, but every cruel word from the officer chipped at the air around him. The officer wasn't finished. She walked up beside him now, her polished boots striking the floor with confidence. "You know," she said loudly, making sure her voice carried through the store, "they should put up a sign in the diaper aisle just for you. Reserved for old-timers. Might make your shopping trips easier." More chuckles, more whispers, but not everyone laughed. Some shoppers lowered their heads, ashamed to hear such ridicule, yet too afraid to stop it. A mother shook her head while pulling her daughter closer. A young man near the frozen foods clenched his fists but stayed silent, his eyes shifting away from the officer's gaze. The cruelty continued. Officer Miller leaned casually against the side of Mr. Harris's cart, smirking at the pile of diapers. "What's the plan here? Stocking up for the year? Or maybe you're running a secret daycare at the retirement home?" She snorted at her own joke. Mr. Harris's hands tightened around the cart handle. His knuckles turned white, the veins standing out like rivers. Still, he said nothing. His silence was heavy, deliberate. The young cashier at the front, watching all of this unfold, felt her heart pounding harder with every word. Her jaw ached from clenching it shut, and her chest rose and fell with quiet fury. She wanted to shout, to stop the officer, but the moment wasn't right, not yet. The line of shoppers in front of her had thinned, and soon it would be Mr. Harris's turn. She could feel it coming, like a storm brewing just behind the horizon. Meanwhile, Officer Miller wasn't finished showing off. She picked up a pack of the diapers from the top of the cart and held it high in the air. "Hey everyone, look at this. Premium absorbency. Must be for those long nights when you just can't make it to the bathroom." Laughter erupted again, though weaker this time. Some shoppers turned away, unwilling to look at the scene any longer. But others still smiled, as if the uniform on the officer gave them permission to enjoy the cruelty. Mr. Harris's eyes lifted briefly, meeting the stares around him. His expression was calm, almost unreadable. But there was a weight in his gaze, a dignity that no insult could erase. He slowly reached for the pack in the officer's hands and set it back into the cart. Without a word, the silence of his response unsettled the crowd. For the first time, Officer Miller's grin faltered. Just for a second. But she quickly recovered, puffing out her chest. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue? Or are you too embarrassed to admit it?" The old man gave no reply. His silence was louder than any argument could be. As they reached the checkout area, the mood of the store began to change. The laughter that had once filled the aisles grew thinner, weaker, like smoke fading into the air. The shoppers were no longer sure if this was funny or if they were witnessing something cruel. The young cashier's hands trembled as she scanned the last of her current customers' groceries. Her throat felt dry, her stomach twisting. She knew the truth, a truth that would silence every whisper and every laugh. But she also knew the moment had to come at the right time. And that time was very close. Mr. Harris stopped his cart in front of her counter. He slowly began unloading the diapers, one pack at a time, his movements steady. The crowd gathered nearby, pretending to shop, but their eyes were fixed on him. The officer stood tall, her grin still plastered across her face, though not as wide as before. She leaned over the counter and said loudly, "Make sure you double bag those diapers, sweetheart. We don't want Grandpa here having any accidents on the way home." The cashier froze. Her fingers hovered over the register, her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes locked on the officer, then shifted to the old man, her father. And in that moment, something inside her broke free. She knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. Asterisk the line at the checkout slowed to a crawl. The beep of the scanner, the rustle of bags, and the shuffle of carts all seemed quieter than usual, as if the entire store was holding its breath. Every eye in the supermarket was fixed on one man, Mr. Harris. He stood straight despite his age, his cart piled high with diapers. His face remained calm, though the weight of mockery had been pressing against him since the moment he entered the store. His silence spoke louder than any word could have. The officer leaned against the counter, still smirking, though her laughter had softened. "Come on, old man," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Say something. Don't just stand there like a statue." But Mr. Harris said nothing. He placed the first pack of diapers onto the counter with careful hands, his movements slow, deliberate, respectful. He treated the packages not as objects of shame, but as necessities, important, valuable, even noble. The young cashier watched him closely. Her heart pounded in her chest, her throat tightening with every second. She could feel tears threatening to rise, but she forced them back. She wasn't ready yet. Not yet. She had to time her words perfectly, one by one. The diapers slid across the scanner. Beep, beep. The sound seemed to echo like a drumbeat in the silent store. The shoppers standing nearby had stopped pretending to shop. Some stood frozen in the aisles, watching. Others leaned on their carts, waiting for the next cruel remark, or perhaps for the truth that lingered just beyond the silence. Mr. Harris placed another pack down. His hands were steady, though veins stood out against his wrinkled skin. He had lived long enough to know that dignity wasn't lost through laughter or mockery. Dignity was lost only when a man allowed others to take it. And he would not allow that. The officer sighed, pretending boredom now. "You're really no fun, Grandpa. You're supposed to get embarrassed, you know. That's how this works. I laugh, you blush. Everyone goes home with a funny story." She tilted her head and raised her eyebrows as if daring him to respond, but he remained silent. The crowd began to shift uneasily. A man in a baseball cap muttered, "This doesn't feel right." A woman holding a basket shook her head, whispering to her friend, "He's just shopping. Leave him alone." The officer heard the whispers, but she ignored them. Her grin faltered only for a moment before she turned back to the cashier. "Hey, sweetheart, maybe you should check if these are the right size. Grandpa might need the extra large." The cashier froze. Her hand stopped midair, clutching a pack of diapers she had just scanned. Her blue eyes locked on the officer. Something inside her burned, a fire she could no longer keep hidden. But again, she held back. Not yet. She had to let the silence stretch, let the tension grow, so that when the truth came out, it would strike like thunder. Mr. Harris looked at her briefly. Their eyes met just for a moment. He gave the faintest nod, as if telling her to be patient, as if reminding her that strength wasn't always in speaking first. Sometimes, strength was in waiting. He lifted another pack and placed it gently on the counter. His silence became heavier, stronger. What had begun as a shield now became a weapon. Each quiet moment cut deeper into the officer's performance, stripping her laughter of its power. The shoppers began to feel it too. The balance in the room was shifting. What once seemed like a joke was no longer funny. The cruel remarks now felt desperate, weak against the wall of silence. The cashier swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly as she bagged the diapers. Her lips parted as if she might finally speak, but then closed again. She was waiting for the perfect moment, the moment when her words would break not only the officer's mockery, but the silence of the entire store. The officer tapped the counter impatiently. "Seriously? Nothing? You're tougher than I thought, old man. But trust me, silence won't save you." Mr. Harris looked at her calmly, his eyes sharp but gentle, like a storm hidden behind still waters. His silence was saving him. His silence was turning the laughter into unease, the whispers into doubt. The cashier finally handed him the last bag. The cart was full again, this time with diapers carefully packed in paper bags. The store felt heavier than before, the air thick with anticipation. The old man reached into his wallet slowly. His fingers shook slightly, not from fear, but from age. He pulled out a few folded bills, worn from use, and placed them gently on the counter. The officer chuckled again, though her voice was thinner now. "Using cash, huh? Old-fashioned. Just like everything else about you." The cashier's hands froze above the money. She could feel it now, the moment. The moment. She could no longer hold back. Her chest rose sharply as she drew in a deep breath. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, her voice trembling with the truth that had waited too long to be spoken. The silence was about to break. Asterisk. The supermarket had gone strangely quiet. Even the beeping scanners at other registers seemed muted, as if the whole building was waiting for something. Mr. Harris stood tall at the checkout counter, his cart now loaded with bags of diapers. His face was calm, but the lines on his skin told stories of long battles fought in silence. The officer leaned closer to the counter, her grin still plastered across her face, though the edges had begun to weaken. "Well," she said loudly, "this is a sight to see. An old man stocking up on diapers. Don't forget the powder, Grandpa. Might help with those rashes." A few weak chuckles rippled through the onlookers, but most people stayed silent. Some looked away, ashamed. Others stared at Mr. Harris with growing respect, realizing he hadn't spoken a single word in response to the humiliation. The cashier's hands trembled as she reached for the money he placed on the counter. Her heart was pounding so hard, she thought everyone could hear it. She looked up at him, her father, and her chest tightened. The world saw him as weak, but she knew the truth. She knew the sacrifices behind those diapers. Her eyes flicked toward the officer, then back to her father. She felt the fire rising in her throat, words pushing to escape, but she hesitated. She wasn't ready, not yet. She needed the officer to go one step further, to dig herself deeper into cruelty, so that the truth would strike like lightning. The officer picked up one of the bags and pretended to struggle with it, laughing loudly. "Whew, heavy load. You sure you can carry all this, Grandpa? Or are you gonna need a patrol car escort home?" Her laughter echoed across the store, but it sounded thinner now, almost forced. A man standing in line nearby cleared his throat, muttering, "That's enough." His wife tugged at his arm nervously, shaking her head, afraid he might cause trouble. The officer ignored them, still performing. "Come on, sweetheart," she said to the cashier. "Ring this guy up fast before he has an accident right here in the store. Don't want to call in the cleaning crew, do we?" The cashier froze. Her hands tightened around the register so hard her knuckles turned white. She couldn't hold it in much longer. The words burned at the back of her throat. Mr. Harris remained silent, sliding the last bill across the counter. His eyes were calm, his breathing steady. His silence had turned the laughter into discomfort, but he knew the final blow would not come from him. It would come from his daughter. The officer leaned on the counter, looking smug. "Seriously, though. What's the story? You embarrassed? You too proud to admit you need these? Everyone's laughing anyway, might as well join in." And then it happened. The cashier slammed her hand down on the counter, startling everyone. The sound cracked through the silence like thunder. Shoppers jumped. The officer blinked, caught off guard. The young woman's blue eyes blazed with fire as she looked straight at the officer. Her voice trembled at first but grew stronger with every word. "They're not for him," she said, her voice cutting through the air. "Those diapers are for me." The store went dead silent. The officer's grin froze, her face suddenly pale. Cashier's chest heaved as she continued, louder now, her voice steady and filled with raw truth. "He's my father. I've been fighting a medical condition for years. And he buys these diapers for me, every week, without complaint, without shame. He carries this burden so I don't have to. And you dare laugh at him? Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman covered her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. A man in the bakery shook his head, whispering, "Oh my God." The officer stumbled back a step, her confident smile gone. Her eyes darted around the store, suddenly aware of all. The eyes on her, not in laughter, but in judgment. Mr. Harris stood still, his hand resting gently on the counter. His silence had carried him through the storm, but now the storm itself had turned. His daughter's words filled the room like a wave, drowning out every cruel laugh, every whisper. The cashier's voice cracked with emotion as she finished. "So laugh at me if you want. Mock me for my condition. But don't you dare humiliate the man who has given everything just to protect me." The officer's lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time, she was speechless. The crowd began to murmur, not with laughter now, but with anger toward the officer and respect for the old man. Heads shook in disbelief. Some shoppers whispered apologies under their breath as if they had been part of the cruelty by staying silent. The officer shifted uncomfortably, her uniform suddenly feeling heavy. She looked at the old man, but his eyes did not waver. He stared back calmly, his dignity intact, stronger than ever, and in that silence, the balance of the store shifted completely. For a long, heavy moment, the store was frozen. The words of the young cashier hung in the air like thunder that refused to fade. Shoppers stood motionless, their carts abandoned, their groceries forgotten. Even the machines seemed to pause. The steady hum of the freezers and the beeping registers felt muted, swallowed by silence. The officer's grin was gone. Her face had drained of color, her confident stance shaken. She had expected laughter, agreement, maybe even applause. Instead, she was now standing in the middle of a storm she never saw coming. The cashier's hands trembled as she held onto the counter. Her voice cracked with emotion, but she did not stop. She looked at her father, the man standing tall, silent, and patient, and then back at the crowd. "You all see an old man buying diapers," she said, her voice stronger now. "But what you don't see is the truth. You don't see the nights he stayed awake when I cried from pain. You don't see the mornings he carried me to the doctor when I couldn't stand. You don't see the sacrifices he made so that I could live with dignity." The crowd stirred. A woman near the front put her hand over her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears. A father holding his toddler hugged the child closer, his throat tightening with emotion. The cashier continued, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "I've lived with a condition since I was a teenager. A condition that makes me depend on these diapers every single day. And do you know what my father did? He never once complained. He never once made me feel ashamed. He carried this burden with me so I wouldn't have to carry it alone." Her words cut through the air like a blade. The laughter that once filled the supermarket was gone, replaced by the sound of quiet sobs and the shuffle of feet as people shifted uncomfortably. The officer looked down at her shoes, her confidence shattered. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her authority, her badge, her uniform, all of it felt meaningless under the weight of the truth. Mr. Harris remained silent, his eyes on his daughter. His lips curved into the faintest smile, not of pride in himself, but of pride in her. He had endured years of quiet sacrifice, never asking for recognition. But now his daughter's voice carried his story into the open for all to hear. The cashier's voice wavered, but she pressed on. "Every week he comes here. He walks these aisles, ignoring the whispers, the stares, the laughter. He buys these diapers with his head held high because he knows love is stronger than shame. And today you all laughed at him. Even you, officer." The last words stung like fire. The officer's shoulders hunched, her head lowering as if the weight of her own cruelty had finally crushed her. The young cashier drew a deep breath, her tears finally spilling over. "If you want to laugh, laugh at me. I'm the reason for those diapers. I'm the one fighting this condition every day. But don't you dare laugh at him. Don't you dare mock the man who gave up everything just to give me a life worth living." A hush spread across the crowd. Some people were openly crying now, wiping their cheeks with tissues or sleeves. Others looked at Mr. Harris with new eyes, not as a frail old man, but as a giant of strength and dignity. The officer shifted uncomfortably, her uniform no shield anymore. Her smirk had vanished, her eyes darting from the floor to the crowd, then to the old man whose silence was louder than her entire performance had ever been. Mr. Harris placed a gentle hand on the counter, his touch steady, his posture proud. He had not spoken a single word through it all, but his silence had carried more weight than any insult. And now his daughter's truth had turned that silence into a victory. The cashier wiped her tears quickly, her voice soft but unshaken. "This man is my father, he is my protector, and he is the only reason I can stand here today and do my job. So the next time anyone thinks about laughing at him, remember this moment. Remember who he really is." A soft murmur spread through the store. People began nodding, whispering words like respect, hero, and incredible. Some clapped quietly, unsure if applause was right, but needing to show something, anything to honor the truth they had just heard. The officer swallowed hard, her eyes downcast. She had no jokes left, no laughter to hide behind. The truth had stripped her of every weapon, and in that silence, one thing became clear to everyone present. The man who had been mocked, shamed, and ridiculed was not weak. He was strong. Stronger than anyone else in the room. Asterisk. The truth had already landed like a thunderclap, shaking every corner of the supermarket. Shoppers who once chuckled now stood frozen, their faces pale with regret. Some whispered apologies under their breath, while others could not even meet the old man's eyes, but no one felt the weight more heavily than Officer Miller. Her once confident smirk had vanished. Her shoulders, once squared with pride, now hunched as though carrying a burden too heavy to bear. The badge on her chest, which had given her power only minutes earlier, now felt like a mark of disgrace. She shifted uneasily, her boots heavy against the polished floor. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Every attempt to open her mouth ended in silence. The cashier's words still rang in her ears. "Don't you dare mock the man who gave up everything just to give me a life worth living." Those words cut deeper than any reprimand from a superior, deeper than any punishment she could imagine. She wasn't just facing one man's quiet dignity. She was facing the judgment of an entire room. The crowd's stares burned into her. People she had sworn to protect now looked at her as if she were the villain. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Elderly shoppers shook their heads in disbelief. A teenager near the candy aisle muttered, "That's messed up," loud enough for her to hear. Shame crawled up her neck, flushing her face red. She tried to stand taller, tried to wear her uniform like a shield again. But the strength was gone. The authority she once commanded had melted away, stripped by the truth of a daughter's love and a father's sacrifice. Officer Miller cleared her throat, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean," she began, but her words cracked in the air. She swallowed hard, searching for an excuse. "It was just a joke." "I didn't," but no one accepted it. The crowd's silence pressed harder. Some shook their heads, others crossed their arms. A woman near the bakery said firmly, "That wasn't a joke, that was cruelty." Her words echoed, and several others nodded in agreement. The officer's lips trembled. She had spent years wearing the uniform, believing it gave her respect, believing it gave her the right to speak louder than others. But here, in front of this quiet man and his brave daughter, the badge felt meaningless. Mr. Harris had not spoken a single word, and yet he had defeated her completely. His silence was stronger than her uniform, stronger than her taunts, stronger than her pride. The cashier's eyes locked on the officer. Blue flames burned in her gaze. She did not yell, but her voice carried with the force of truth. "You humiliated a man who has done nothing but love and protect me. You mocked him for his sacrifices. Do you see now? Do you understand what you've done?" Officer Miller's throat tightened. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Her eyes flickered toward Mr. Harris, and for the first time, she truly saw him not as a target for jokes, but as a man of unshakable strength. A man who had endured ridicule to shield the dignity of his daughter. Her chest ached with guilt. She thought of her own father, how he had taught her to respect others, how he had raised her to know the difference between strength and cruelty. And now here she was, betraying that very lesson, mocking another father for showing the purest kind of strength. She dropped her gaze to the floor, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." But the word felt small, weak, almost useless against the wound she had caused. The crowd did not clap. They did not cheer. They simply stared, their silence demanding more than words. Tears threatened to rise in her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let them fall in uniform. Yet inside, she was breaking. The shame burned hotter with every passing second. She stepped back slowly, her boots heavy against the floor. She no longer looked like the officer who had mocked so confidently. She looked like someone stripped, bare, her arrogance shattered by truth. Mr. Harris lifted the last bag from the counter and placed it gently into his cart. His movements were calm, deliberate, full of dignity. He didn't even glance at the officer. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than her apology, louder than her shame. The cashier wiped her eyes and stood tall, her strength now shining through. She had spoken her truth, and her father's dignity had carried it into the hearts of everyone present. The officer lingered for a moment longer, her hands trembling at her sides. The weight of hundreds of eyes bore down on her, and she knew. She had no power here anymore. Not in this store. Not against this man. Finally, she turned and walked away, her footsteps heavy, her head bowed low. The sound of her boots echoed faintly, then disappeared as she left the store. The crowd remained silent, their eyes following her until she was gone. And when the door finally closed behind her, all that remained was the quiet dignity of a man who had never needed to speak to win respect. The sliding doors at the entrance closed behind the officer with a dull thud. The sound lingered for a moment, then faded into silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The store was still, like the calm after a storm. Mr. Harris stood quietly at the counter, his cart filled with neatly packed bags of diapers. His weathered hands rested lightly on the handle, his posture steady and unshaken. He had not spoken a single word since walking into the store, and yet his silence had carried more power than the officer's loudest insults. The cashier, his daughter, took a shaky breath. Her cheeks were wet, but her eyes glowed with strength. She had spoken her truth, and it had turned the tide of the entire room. Now she looked at her father, her lips trembling into a faint smile. "Dad," she whispered softly, so only he could hear. He gave her a small nod. His eyes were gentle, filled with pride. Not pride in himself, but in her. She had found her voice, and together they had shown the world the meaning of dignity. Around them, the crowd shifted slowly. Shoppers who had once laughed now stood ashamed, many with their heads lowered. A woman stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "Sir," she said softly, "I'm sorry. I should never have laughed." Her words opened the floodgates. Another man in a baseball cap added, "You didn't deserve that. None of it." An elderly woman near the bread aisle wiped her eyes with a tissue. "You are stronger than anyone here, sir. Stronger than most of us could ever be." One by one, people began to nod, their voices rising with quiet respect. Some murmured apologies, others whispered words of admiration. The supermarket, once filled with laughter at the old man's expense, was now filled with reverence. The cashier's chest swelled with emotion as she heard the words. For years, she had carried her secret quietly, letting her father bear the weight of it in silence. But now everyone knew. And instead of shame, there was respect. Mr. Harris remained calm, accepting no praise, no apologies. He simply pushed his cart forward, his head held high. He did not need their approval. His dignity had never depended on it. But his daughter, his precious daughter, was no longer alone in her truth. As he turned the cart toward the exit, something unexpected happened. A man from the crowd began clapping softly. The sound echoed in the silent store, awkward at first, then steady. Another person joined in. Then another. Soon, the entire supermarket was applauding. The sound swelled, filling the aisles with a roar of respect. People weren't clapping for the diapers. They weren't clapping for the reveal. They were clapping for the quiet strength of a man who had endured humiliation with patience, for the love between a father and his daughter, and for the truth that had silenced cruelty. The cashier bit her lip as tears flowed freely now. She had never felt prouder. Mr. Harris paused for a moment at the doors, turning his head slightly. He didn't smile, but his eyes spoke louder than words. He gave the faintest nod, acknowledging the respect, but not needing it. His silence, once mocked, was now honored. He pushed the cart out into the daylight, the automatic doors sliding open as if bowing to him. His daughter followed close behind, her steps steady, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Inside, the crowd slowly dispersed, but the atmosphere lingered. Shoppers left with more than groceries. They left with a story of humility, dignity, and love. A story they would carry home and tell their families. And though the officer's cruelty had once filled the aisles with laughter, it was the old man's silence that would be remembered. For silence, when carried with dignity, can speak louder than any voice.